What's your childhood mystery that you finally solved years later? Story 1. I met my wife in college, and when we were dating, she often mentioned that when she was a kid, she had a play doctor's kit that was stolen from her house. She had some surgeries really young, and so her parents bought it for her to demystify the doctor's office. She'd use it all the time on her dad, poking and prodding him. One day, I asked her about the robbery. Did they take everything? Jewellery, the TV, other valuables? No, and no. It hit me. I asked, so someone broke into your house and only stole your doctor's kit, leaving anything worth fencing there? Yeah, why? Did you ever consider your folks were tired of you using the kit on them all the time after you got better? Oh, damn. Oh, bless her. We all had that one favourite toy, didn't we, as a kid? And I bet so many parents have done this. They've thrown it out and just claimed they've either been robbed, it's just gone missing and no one knows where it is. That is an absolute classic, isn't it? I can't believe she found that out 15 years later. That is just mental. Story 2. My dad used to occasionally burst out with this one line of a song. Said Barnacle Bill the sailor. Only ever that line. When I was 6 or so, I asked him why, and he said it was an old drinking song that was absolutely filthy and I was too young to hear the rest of it. This continued once or twice a year until I was 18. I told him I was an adult now and he could tell me the rest of the song. I distinctly remember him looking up from the newspaper, sighing and folding it, then going, the truth is, I can never remember the rest of the song, and then went right back to reading the newspaper. Story 3. The weird smell that I referred to as stinky cheese smell were probably a symptom of seizures. It would happen maybe twice a year. It's not really like cheese, it's like a smell that isn't a smell. I don't know how to even describe it. It was so minor, parents disregarded it. I can remember it starting in 2nd grade. I suddenly started having it a lot more as an adult when I hit 28 and got diagnosed 2 years later after symptoms became way more extreme. Makes so much sense now. No way, that's mad that it was a symptom of seizures. My friend in college actually used to have seizures, right? Before she'd have the seizure, she would just like her head would wobble and you could tell that it was going to happen. And people having seizures is actually like a fear of mine. It triggers my health anxiety. So whenever she went like that, I would literally dart out the room. I was like, I couldn't cope with it at all. Story 4. The entire time I lived in my childhood home, my mum hid my Christmas presents in her secret hiding place. She made it sound mystical and mysterious. A few months ago, a while after I moved out, she finally told me what the secret hiding place actually was. The Christmas tree box in a cabinet in the garage. She would replace the Christmas tree with my presents when she put the tree up. Story 5. I remember being about 8 and in the car with my dad. I was in the front seat and we were driving somewhere, and this song came on the radio. He cranked it and said something about it being the best guitar playing ever. He really jammed out, which was really uncharacteristic because he was usually so stoic. It was the only time I heard that song, and he died before I could ever ask him what the song was. When I asked around, no one knew what the frick I was talking about or what song I was thinking of. So I had this melody in my head for years. But how do you look up a song that has no lyrics? So for years and years, this song stayed on the back burner in my brain. I was afraid to forget it. Somehow this story pops up when I'm like 26 or so, chatting with my husband, and we search YouTube for best guitar songs. After about 15 minutes, we find it. Cliffs of Dover was the song that I'd burned into my brain on repeat for 16 years. Now I jam out to it with my kids. Oh, that's a really sweet story. I love that. I'm so glad you figured out what song it was. I bet that was so annoying, like it just being in your mind for years and not knowing what it was. And now it's been passed down generations to your kids as well, so they can listen to that when they're older as well and think of you. That's lovely. Story 6. When I was in elementary school, I always wondered what the teacher's staff room was like. It seemed so mysterious, and I remember trying to get a peek anytime I walked by and the door would open. Later became a teacher and can fully confirm they are dull. Often toxic spaces full of cranky teachers complaining about students. Yes, me too. I always wondered what the staff room was like, and I think I got the opportunity to go in there once and I was like, is this really what I've been wondering about the whole time? Like, I thought it was this incredible, like mystical, beautiful, like top secret place. I went in there, it's literally just like a kitchen with a microwave and a few chairs, buzzing. Story 7. When I was younger, like 4 or 5, my family had a pet turtle. One day the turtle went missing and my parents told me it climbed the wall in our backyard and went to the creek behind our house. I, being a naive toddler child, did not question this logic. Fast forward to when I was 17 and driving with my mum in the car. We saw a tortoise crossing the street and I was suddenly thrown back to my memory of us having a pet turtle. I pulled over to save the tortoise and was like, oh my god, Mum, turtles can't climb walls. What happened to our turtle? Came to find out it burrowed a hole in our lawn and my dad didn't notice it until after he ran it over with a lawnmower. Obviously, it was easier to pick up the pieces and tell your kid it climbed the wall than admit you murdered it with a lawnmower. Parents lied to me about a pet going missing, and I found out it was brutally murdered on accident by my father. Story 8. Reverse of this. As a kid, my dad would call me from the other side of the house to bring him something to drink from the kitchen. He always drank from a straw. In about first grade, I started getting annoyed at this, so I started poking a tiny hole in his straw as my own little vengeance. I didn't come clean about this until I was like 22 years old. The look on his face was priceless. It's like he instantly snapped back to then and knew exactly what I was talking about and just said, "Son of a witch. You did, didn't you?" He just thought we bought cheap straws. Story 9. I visited my dad when I was 6 or 7 years old at the place where he worked, or so I was told. I remember remarking at the time, and people laughed at me because I said it looked just like a prison. The people laughing were the guards, and I was indeed visiting my dad at Terminal Island Federal Correctional Institution, where he was a federal inmate. No way, that is mad. If I ever got the luxury of going to work with my dad, I'd be like, I can't wait to have a job when I'm older and have an office like this. It's amazing. Like, I thought work was this amazing, cool thing that my dad did, right? And now I don't want to work. My office is hell. No, I'm joking, I don't work in an office, but when I did work in an office, I couldn't believe that I used to want to do that. Story 10. I solved a family mystery for my mum. I wasn't allowed to play console video games during the week, all the way until I was 18, but some nights I'd really be craving it, so I would noiselessly creep through my house into the basement, where I could play video games in peace. But once every 30 times or so, one of my parents would need something from the basement, and I'd quickly turn off the TV monitor, hide in the guest room, and pray they didn't turn on a light or notice the Xbox was on. One night, I ducked into the guest room and hid behind the bed. To my horror, my mum followed me into the room and turned on the lights. I was panicking, so when she started digging through the closet with her back to me, I made a run for it. I nearly brushed her shirt, and if she'd seen me, I'd probably have given her a heart attack. But I made it and kept going all the way to bed. About 5 years went by, and my mum said something like, "You're such a quiet walker." And I told her it was because of my basement trips, thinking I had nothing to lose. My mum's face went kind of solemn, and when I explained, she said, "So there really was someone down there." And she explained that she remembered the exact night and the feeling that there was a ghost in the room. Over the next couple of days, she'd stare into space and just say, "I can't believe you were really there." She seemed to get over it, but she probably checks empty rooms closer now. Story 11. Not sure if this is considered a mystery or not. My mother, who passed about in 2019, used to make a meatloaf every single year on Groundhog's Day. Every single year. Every single year, she'd tell us it was groundhog, and I always thought it just tasted like ground beef. But I was a kid. I'm 33 now. Last year, I'd said something to my brother about it and asked if he knew where Mum got the groundhog. I wanted to do it for my son. My brother had no idea what I was talking about. I told him about it and he started laughing. My wife started laughing. My own son, who didn't know why, started laughing. Mum got me good. Mystery solved. It was just regular meatloaf. Ah, that's a classic, isn't it? I bet so many parents pretend that it's this like really cool dish just so you eat it. Like, 'cause you know you didn't eat veg, like fruit and veg when you were a kid. It was the worst thing ever. But if Mum was like, "Yeah, but these are special ones," I'd be like, "Well, I've got to eat it now, Mum." Story 12. My mum used to call us in for dinner by yelling out the back door from the kitchen. I was in middle school before I realised the scream door was actually called a screen door. Story 13. We grew up poor, and at the age of 10, my friends were all having these crazy birthday parties with petting zoos, bounce houses, clowns, etc. So my mother, who is very resourceful, decided I would have a sleepover for my 11th birthday. It was great, and we were going to make ice cream cones. So we got all the stuff out with my mum, and my mother opened up the box of cones, and they were all smashed up. She said that we weren't having regular ice cream, we were having Magic Castle sundaes, because the broken ice cream cones resembles the sections of a castle. We all thought this was great, and we had them. When my friends went home, they asked their parents to make Magic Castle sundaes. 2 days ago, I found out that my mother was getting the past sale-by foods behind the grocery store. They were not expired, just past sell-by date. She had no idea that the cones were broken up until she opened them with us. She thought of the Magic Castle idea quickly, and we all loved it. Just goes to show how stupid kids are. Story 14. When I was really young, me and my siblings would play in my grandparents' yard. My grandfather would tell us to stay away from the skunk hole at the edge of the yard. We lived in South Texas, so this wasn't something out of the ordinary, and we just avoided it like any other animal home. Years later, it dawned on me. It was actually the septic tank access. Septic tank access, what's that? Someone, I need you to explain for me in the comments yet again, because I'm an idiot and don't know what it is, but I haven't heard of that before, but it sounds like something harmful. Story 15. I live and grew up in the Deep South. As a child from earliest memories until about 8, we would take a winter trip up to Stowe, Vermont to see the grandparents. I would have scary nights hearing ghosts wailing outside the windows. It was terrifying. Grandparents moved south and we stopped going. When I was in my 30s, I took another trip up to Vermont. First night stay. I heard the ghosts. Turns out the winter winds up north are way different than the winds of southern nights. Suddenly, my general fear of the dark disappeared as I realised fully what the source of the sound was. Oh my gosh, that reminds me, as a child, you know when cats are mating outside and they're like that weird noise? I genuinely used to think there was like vampires outside my house, like jumping up at my window to come and kill me. That was terrifying, and then I found out it was cats mating. Story 16. The reason my aunt punched her husband at the pool during a huge family vacation. It was because she found out that the long-distance charges to the hotel room they shared had a ton of calls to a woman he was known to think was swell. Story 17. When I was 10, my godfather gave me $20 as a Christmas gift. At the end of the dinner, the money had disappeared. For years, my parents blamed me for being irresponsible with my money. Years later, we figured out, after she was caught stealing stuff from my aunt's house, that my cousin's fiancé at the time is a kleptomaniac. Turns out she was the one that stole the money. Story 18. When I was 4, I vividly remember getting into my mum's car and her telling me that our cat had died. She told me how she rushed him to the vet and he was shedding fur. Something was seriously wrong. Despite her best efforts, he died. I never knew why he died and why it happened so suddenly, but I accepted that it happened. Fast forward about 15 years, right? I'm home from college for Christmas. On Christmas Eve, I'm out driving to the store with my dad and uncle. They're talking about the cat my parents got for Christmas one year, the cat mentioned above. My dad says, "Yeah, that thing was too aggressive, so I took it to a farm and gave it away." Normally, when the family pet dies, the parents lie to the kid and say, "It went to a farm upstate somewhere," to ease the burden. Not my parents. They told me the horrifying truth, even though it wasn't, true. Oh, that reminds me of my poor little hamster, Honey, Russian dwarf hamster I had when I was younger. And she died of hip cancer. It was horrible. She was like limping around her cage. And then, when my hamster died, right, they go rock hard, don't they? She was like led there, just rock hard in her cage, and my brother was singing to me, "Solid as a rock." Story 19. As a kid, I played Medal of Honor, Allied Assault with my brother. We got to 5th level, which took place in a rainy French city, similar to Saving Private Ryan. However, we always got stuck on the first objective, which was to locate the bazooka team. There were no clues as to where this team was in a giant rubble-filled city with poor visibility. To make things worse, hidden enemy snipers would constantly fire at you, making the search much more difficult than it already was. My brother and I practically sourced every nook and cranny, but we never found this team. If the bazooka team was trying to stay hidden, they were doing a good job. In the months that followed, we reinstalled and replayed the game several times, but would always get stuck on that level. Fast forward several years, and I got the digital version of Allied Assault for nostalgia's sake. I dreaded playing the 5th level, but to my surprise, I easily cleared the first objective by happening across the corpses of the bazooka team in one of the buildings. Turns out the CD we originally played on was bugged, where the bodies never even rendered into the game. All we did was waste several hours looking for a group of people that never made it to the battle in the first place. Giddy at the prospect of finally completing the game. I happily continued, only to quit when I kept getting sniped by those damn hidden snipers. Story 20. One evening when camping, my brother caught a fish that we decided to keep alive in the cooler for some reason. Well, the next morning we ran out to see the fish and it had grown like 5 inches. We were so excited and didn't know how the fish grew that much overnight. Last year, we brought it up and my dad said that he had got up that morning and seen the fish being taken by a raccoon and that he spent the next hour or so frantically fishing for another one. He said he caught the new fish, the first one he was able to catch, just a few minutes before we got up. I'd never questioned that the fish growing that much as I grew up, but after hearing what really happened, I did feel like we probably should have wondered about that more. Guys, I bet there's so many things that happened when we were kids, right, that our parents told us that just weren't true, like they never happened, and we probably still believe it to this day. Like, for sure, there's things that I wonder about that I still just don't know the answers to. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll probably still be figuring it out until I'm like 40. Story 21. I was watching Star Trek TNG with my dad when someone told Riker to wash his back. When I asked my father why someone would say that to another person, he said, "So you can smell someone coming up behind you." It wasn't until years later that I understood how easy it was to hear watch as wash, and how committed my dad was to willfully deceiving his children for personal satisfaction. Story 22. When I was like 8 or so, I answered our house phone, and it was a man who asked to speak to my mum. Didn't ask for her by name. Said, "Could I speak to your mum, please?" I asked who it was, and he said, "It's Santa Claus." I was so excited and ran to my mum, and I was telling all my friends for days that Santa Claus had called my house. This led me to believe in Santa for a few years longer than most kids normally do. I was heartbroken when I found out that Santa wasn't real. Years and years later, I remembered to ask my mum who had called that day and said they were Santa Claus. It was our reverend, and my mum was a deacon. He'd known me for years, so recognised my voice when I answered and knew what age I was. It had never occurred to me. Guys, how old were you when you stopped believing in Santa Claus? I think I was pretty old, I'm not going to lie. I really, really believed Santa Claus was real. And then when I found out, I was like, well, obviously as a kid, you'd be gutted, wouldn't you? But I want to know how old you guys were, because I feel like I was quite old. I reckon I was I can't remember now, maybe 13? Story 23. John Travolta was actually John Travolta, which really made a lot more sense. Story 24. Not mine, but my husband's. I hope he doesn't see this because then my cover's blown. He said in middle school, there was a time that he'd get pulled out of class to shoot free throws in the gym. Only him. He didn't think this was strange, but didn't understand why he was the only one that got to do that. Turns out, his parents told his teachers he couldn't participate in sex education. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video, and have a wonderful day. Story 25. My dad used to say he could stop the rain for a moment by snapping his fingers. He'd do it in the car when it was pouring. I was so mesmerised. Told all my friends about it well into late elementary school. I've since realised he'd snap as we drove underneath an overpass. That is quite clever though, to be fair. That's a good trick. One day if I ever have kids, I'm definitely going to use that. And then we can have this conversation when they're my age. Story 26. My dad is an ex-Catholic, and every night when he'd tuck me in until I left the house, he'd say, "We love you, God bless you, good night." And I was always wondering why, since he'd stopped going to church long ago. Fast forward to me being 28 years old and watching an old Bruce Springsteen concert together, one of his favourite artists, and Bruce says, "We love you, God bless you, good night," at the end of his set. I turned my head towards my dad and asked if this is why he said that for so many years to me at night. He laughed and said, "I have no original material." Story 27. Who ate all the cherries in the cherry cake? I was blamed for this for years after someone picked out all of the cherries and ate them during a family Christmas party. 8 years later, my little sister confessed to me that it had been her. Story 28. When I was a kid in the 70s, my parents worked in Canada's Arctic, but were from Nova Scotia. I had a pet mouse, Pixie. Pixie died the night before our family flew home to Nova Scotia for summer vacation. It was many years later before I realised that probably wasn't a sad coincidence. Story 29. Mystery of why my mum never ordered anything for herself and was never hungry whenever she took my sister and I to eat out. 25 years later, she told me she really was hungry and wanted to eat too, but she only had enough money to feed the two of us. She didn't want us to feel guilty. I love my mum so much. Oh, that is so cute. So cute. Wait, that reminds me, my mum never used to eat when she'd take me and my brother out either. Maybe that was the reason. Okay, I'm going to have to ask her about this now, aren't I? I will let you know, guys. I'll update you in the next video. Story 30. I remember there was a time where I had to start asking to go play in the backyard. When I was about 6 or 7, maybe 8, with my siblings, so she could supervise us. We never had to do this previously, so my siblings and I were very confused. And any time we didn't ask, she got us in big trouble. Turns out the neighbours were harbouring a known paedophile in their house, and that's why Mum got so upset with us going outside without asking. Story 31. My uncle, single no kids, lived a few houses away from my grandparents. So my siblings and I would go between the houses and always loved my uncle's house because he had a huge fish tank of tropical fish and let us play video games. He was the most fun uncle there was, always taking us to the movies, amusement parks, fishing, golfing, and was so fun to be around. Always had us rolling with laughter. But over time, he became less okay with us popping over, and we resorted to sneaking into his house. We didn't get far along, and he was fuming. From that point on, we always just saw him in my grandparents' house. We used to joke with him about having a girlfriend over. Fast forward 17 years later, he had a massive heart attack, and while he was in the hospital, his sisters went into his house to look for paperwork and got the house ready for his return. There they found rooms full of empty bottles of cheap vodka. My uncle had severe alcoholism for years, and none of us knew it. And suddenly so many little things started making sense. He ended up dying shortly therefore after of organ failure brought on by alcoholism. Wasn't even 60 yet. Story 32. I've always wanted to know what was behind the ATMs at a bank, how it worked and where did the money come from. I grew up and worked at a bank just to find out some fat dude had to squeeze behind the ATMs to refill it. Me. Stop it. No way. I actually still wonder how the money gets in there. Genuinely. I used to think that behind the ATMs, right, there was just this massive pile of money that never ran out. That was what I believed. But now someone actually has to put the money in there. You guys probably think I'm such an idiot, don't you? But I'm just a very naive person. Story 33. 9 out of 10 times it wasn't a skunk. Story 34. I had meningitis when I was 2 years old, and my baby brother had it also and he died. I had the viral form. He had the bacterial form. I grew up thinking I had it first and always felt like I gave it to him and was the reason he died. I know, but you can't help what you think, especially when you're a kid. It wasn't until I was an adult that I learned that he actually had it before me. I don't know why no one had ever told me that before, except maybe they didn't because they weren't aware that I always harboured this guilt about it since I kept everything inside. Not one person had ever mentioned to me that he died before I got it. Or maybe I was in the hospital when he died. That part still isn't clear to me. No way. Oh my God, you must have been so relieved when you found that out because it's so true. When you believe something as a kid, like it stays in your mind, no matter how unrealistic it actually is. Like you fully believe it, don't you? And you get fixated on it. So I'm so glad you found that out. Story 35. I used to go to our local YMCA after school, and during the summer when I was a kid, we went swimming in the pool almost every day. And being the curious kid I was, I always wondered what was behind the caution doors with the weird triangle markings. Fast forward 8 years and I'm now working at that YMCA as a lifeguard. And behind the doors, old smelly pool chemical testing rooms. Very anticlimactic. YMCA, it's fun to stay at the YMCA. Do-do-do-do-do. Sorry, that's all I was thinking when I heard YMCA. Story 36. In preschool, I had a substitute teacher who had a long pinky nail. I asked him how come, and he told me it just grows faster. Years later, I realised. Oh, I see. Naughty teacher. Naughty, naughty teacher. I met someone on holiday with a really long pinky nail, and I always wondered. And now I'm older, I know. Naughty boy. Story 37. My dad and sister used to play pranks on my dad's secretary. When we grew up, he admitted that he was having an affair with her. It makes my skin crawl thinking that he used my oblivious little sister to flirt with his woman behind our mother's back. Story 38. I wasn't a kid anymore, but some years back when my mum was terminally ill, my family was receiving food-based gifts from a lot of our friends. Prep dinners, baked snacks, a restaurant gift card or two, the usual support friends extend when people they care about are going through tough times. For a long time, I remember Dad asking me if I'd tried any pastries we'd gotten from some family friends. We'll call them the Nelsons. I let him know they were a little dry, but very tasty, and he chuckled. It stuck with me because it was an odd question and reaction. It wasn't until a couple years later, spacing out driving home, that I remembered Dad's bizarre reaction and the fact that the Nelsons had suggested easing some of Mum's pain with which they grew at home around the same period. I had eaten pot cookies. I feel like an idiot for not realising it, and I don't remember anything that happened after I ate the pastries. So wait, you were actually getting stoned then whilst eating these. How old were you? And surely you must have felt weird after eating them. You'd have been like, Mum, Dad, I feel strange after eating these things. Like, no? Story 39. How Sinterklaas made the Paponton fall through the ceiling. I quickly discovered Santa wasn't real when I was a kid, but I was certain that the Dutch version, Sinterklaas, was real because in December, Peppernotten, tiny Dutch cookies, would suddenly rain down on me, and I thought Sinterklaas was on the roof dropping it through the ceiling. I was so convinced about this that I bragged to the kids in my class that my Santa was real and theirs was fake, but the Dutch Santa only visits Dutch kids in America. Apparently my mum would carry handfuls of Peppernotten in her pockets, and when I wasn't expecting it, she would throw it up in the air above me. I don't know how I didn't realise what was going on at the time. The first year I was in on The Secret and I watched my mum throw Peppernotten on my brother. It seemed so obvious. Story 40. In kindergarten, I had a guinea pig that turned into many guinea pigs after I babysat the class guinea pig for Xmas break. Parents were thrilled. Anyway, my teacher took the entire family back to her house and was supposed to sell them, and I would get my original guinea pig back. They never returned, and my parents told me they all got sold together as one big happy family. I didn't find out until I was maybe 25 that a coyote actually got into the cage and they all got eaten together as one big happy family. This is the way. I had a little bunny called Rosie when I was younger and we lived right next to an allotments, and the bunny went missing, right? And I was asking for years where this bunny went. And my mum was like, she just went up into bunny heaven. Like, it was just her time. And I was like, oh, bless her. Turns out she escaped through the allotment, so she was probably mauled to death by a fox. Story 41. For over 20 years, I had a very distinct memory of seeing this movie with my dad around the holidays in our living room. It was a black and white movie, but I had a vivid memory of only this one specific scene. I was probably about 6 or 7 when I watched it with him. It bugged me for the longest time. I would think about it periodically for years because I remembered it being so cool. I just wanted to know what movie it was so I could check it out as an adult. Then one day, I can't even remember where, but someone online somewhere had described this movie and mentioned the name, and it sounded really similar to the one I remembered. I looked it up on YouTube and it turns out the movie was Babes in Toyland March of the Wooden Soldiers. The scene I remembered so vividly was all of the soldiers marching out of the toy shop. Figuring this out was literally one of the most satisfying things I've ever felt in my life. They are just the best moments though, aren't they? Moments like that. It's like when you've been trying to remember a song for ages and then you remember it. Oh, it's the most satisfying feeling ever, but wow, you must have felt amazing figuring that out after years. Story 42. I have these pale white flecks in the centre of my front teeth, adult set. Everybody I meet, upon seeing my smile for the first time up close, remark on it. I found out about 2 years ago that it's caused by consuming above a certain amount of fluoride before your adult teeth set in. It's called dental fluorosis. As a kid, I used to swallow toothpaste rather than spit it out. Plus, our water is fluoridated, so I suppose that's how I got to consuming that much fluoride. Thanks for the silver. Story 43. The random claps at midnight in my house weren't from ghosts, and weren't claps either. Oh no. When you realise that, it's a tough day, isn't it? It's a very tough day. Story 44. I figured out my dad wasn't on a business trip in 2005. He was at my uncle's wedding and didn't want to take me all the way there because it was in Ireland and he knew I'd want to go if he told me. In hindsight, I probably should have picked up on the lie. My dad is a school custodian. Story 45. Turns out I have ADHD. Story 46. I begged my parents to let me attend regular school when I reached high school age. Homeschooled. They kept saying my math programs didn't line up right and I might get stuck an extra year if I tried to go, but we could think about it. I was thinking about it the other day and I was like, well, she's pretty sure it was not completely true and they just didn't want me going to normal school. I don't know why I just realised this. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos coming daily.